7 days into Operation Epic Fury, the United States had struck over 3,000 targets across Iranian territory. Navy assets declared combat ineffective. Ballistic missile launches down 90% from peak volume. The White House press secretary used the word overwhelming 4 times in 6 minutes. Washington believed it was winning. It was not asking the right question. The question was not whether Iran could fight back militarily. The question was whether Iran needed to, because 21 miles wide at its narrowest point sat the most consequential choke point in the history of global energy markets, the Strait of Hormuz. And Tehran had not yet touched it. 17 million barrels of crude oil pass through Hormuz every single day. 17% of all oil traded globally and 30% of all seaborne crude shipments. Japan sources 83% of its crude through this corridor. South Korea, 76%. India, 60%. China, 45% of its seaborne imports. No bypass exists. No pipeline alternative capable of absorbing that volume. There is only the Strait, and Iran sits on its northern shore with hardened underground anti-ship missile batteries built for precisely this contingency. That is not geography. That is leverage. Washington had war-gamed Hormuz for decades. The conclusion never changed. Sustained closure triggers an oil spike of $40 to $70 per barrel within 72 hours. Global GDP contraction of $1.2 to $2.4 trillion over 60 days. Strategic reserves covering approximately 90 days for developed economies and far thinner for everyone else. Washington knew all of this. Washington proceeded anyway. Tehran had been watching with the patience of a government holding a card it had not yet played. But this is where it gets serious. On day 6, the IRGC Navy conducted what Iranian state media described as routine defensive exercises near shipping lane approaches south of Bandar Abbas. 3 fast attack craft moved in formation. A Singapore-registered container vessel altered course 17 degrees. War risk insurance premiums for Hormuz transit increased 41% overnight. 17 major shipping operators issued internal guidance before committing to transit schedules the following week. None of this reached the evening news in Washington. All of it was visible to every energy trading desk in Singapore, Dubai, Geneva, and Houston. The oil market registered the signal before the diplomatic community did. Brent crude moved $4.20 in the first hour of Asian trading. Not a single barrel had been blocked. The market was pricing probability, and probability had shifted in a direction no White House statement could reverse, because energy markets respond to physical reality, not political messaging. Iranian shore-based missiles, including the Noor system, at 170-kilometer range, could still reach vessels transiting the Strait from positions American airstrikes had not yet fully degraded. The IRGC understood its remaining inventory with more precision than any Pentagon briefing slide could capture. Washington's strategic calculation rested on a sequencing assumption, clean in theory and fragile in practice. Degrade the launchers fast enough. Destroy command and control. Create enough confusion inside IRGC leadership that the closure order could not be coordinated before American air power removed the capability to execute it. The projected timeline was 3 to 4 additional weeks. The problem was that timeline assumed Iran would wait for it to complete. Iran had not agreed to that timeline. What happened next stunned even senior officials, tracking the file for weeks. Iranian state television broadcast footage of coastal defense units along the Hormuz shoreline. Truck-mounted missile systems moving through terrain previously assessed as inactive. Systems consistent with C-802 anti-ship cruise missiles covering the full width of the Strait and into Gulf of Oman approaches. Simultaneously, Bandar Abbas began repositioning mine-laying vessels from maintenance berths to operational anchorages. No mines deployed. The repositioning itself was the message. Tehran did not need to act. It needed only to signal that it could. The signal landed in 3 places simultaneously. Lloyd's of London suspended war risk policy issuance for Hormuz transit. The International Energy Agency activated emergency protocols between member energy ministries within 40 minutes. The New York Mercantile Exchange saw crude futures spike $9.40 in 11 minutes before a volatility halt fired. Every refinery operator, every airline fuel desk, every strategic reserve manager ran the same calculation. How many days of buffer if the Strait closes tomorrow? But this is where Washington miscalculated at the deepest level. Operation Epic Fury followed the 1991 Gulf War model. Destroy enough infrastructure fast enough and political will collapses. The model worked in 1991 because Iraq had no asymmetric deterrent threatening the global economic system. Iran had one. Hormuz was not a military target. It was a financial weapon requiring no military superiority to activate, only willingness to absorb its own costs while making the costs for everyone else significantly worse. Iran imports almost no crude oil. Years of sanctions had forced development of reserve strategies calibrated for exactly this pressure. A closure would cost Iran export revenue. It would cost Japan its industrial base, South Korea its manufacturing, India its growth, China 45% of seaborne supply. The asymmetry was economic, not military. Tehran made this calculation long before Washington signed the first strike authorization. American business grasped the exposure faster than American foreign policy did. Oil company risk committees convened emergency sessions. Fuel hedging desks covered forward positions at prices that would have seemed extraordinary 48 hours earlier. The Chamber of Commerce received 12 separate Hormuz inquiries within 6 hours of the Iranian coastal broadcast. Automotive manufacturers reviewed supply chain continuity scenarios. None of it was public. All of it was happening in the buildings where decisions that actually determined the outcome were being made. The international response did not arrive in America's favor. Japan signaled that Allied patience had limits when alliance cost meant a potential 83% disruption to national energy supply. South Korea followed within 90 minutes. India called for diplomatic solutions, preserving regional stability. China said nothing publicly and accelerated Gulf energy discussions through channels Washington could see, but not stop. Saudi Arabia called Washington through lines not designed to be overheard. 3 paths remained: accelerate strikes into Bandar Abbas and absorb the political cost with already uneasy allies. Negotiate and validate. Iranian leverage after 7 days of overwhelming victory messaging. Issue deterrence signals, assuming 40 years of threats would finally alter Iranian calculus. None resolved the core problem. The Strait had not closed, but closure probability was priced into every barrel, on every exchange, in every time zone. Damage was accumulating without a single mine deployed. You do not need to close the strait to impose the cost of closing it. You need only to make the market believe you might. Tehran understood that before the first American aircraft left the runway. 2 hours ago, Washington described this as overwhelming success. 2 hours later, every energy ministry in Asia was on emergency protocol, and oil had moved $9 in 11 minutes on footage of trucks driving along a coastline. The knockout blow landed where Washington never modeled. Not in Tehran, in the market, and markets do not respond to press conferences.